So welcome to Blender Benders and the Blender course. We're going to be learning Blender. Blender is a very powerful 3D creation suite. I call it a suite because it does almost or just about everything that we would want it to do. We're going to be learning Blender with a bias towards Second Life, creating for Second Life. So there's a lot of stuff in Blender that we won't touch on because we can't use it in Second Life. And the way I teach Blender is I like to go through it step by step. You learn what you need as you need it. A lot of tutorials will just bombard you with information, some of it relevant, some of it not relevant. I don't like to work that way. I like to bring you through step by step. So what we'll be doing is week by week is building up our knowledge from what we learned last week and moving forward. The first time you open Blender, you're presented with this splash screen and you'll see some options here. This only happens on the very first open. You'll see we've got some options to change shortcuts, which mouse button we select with, what the spacebar does and the theme, or we can load if you already have been using it, the 2.9 settings. My advice is to leave this exactly as it is. The reason for this is Blender 2.8 is very new. There's a lot of people transitioning over from 2.79, and that had different keyboard shortcuts. It had different selections. It has changed quite a bit, but moving forward, as new tutorials come out, not only mine but other people's, they will most likely be using the standard Blender configuration, the default configuration. So I would leave that as it is and just press save user settings. Then your splash screen is presented like this, and this is how it will look from now on. Okay, you will have, as you start making files, a list of your previous files that you can open, but generally this is it. To get rid of the splash screen, just click anywhere off it. So now let's have a look at the interface. The interface can be quite confusing. There's quite a lot of it, but it can be broken down into windows. Okay, so what we have here is the 3D viewport. Okay, and this will contain the actual model, your lighting in your scene. This is where we will do most of our work. In the standard layout, we also have an outliner. This outliner tells us everything that's going on in the 3D viewport, in the scene. Okay, so if we look at the outliner, everything comes in a collection. We can make more collections, we'll worry about that later. But if we expand the collection, we've got the camera, which is this. We've got the cube, which is this. And we've got the lamp, or the light, which is this. Okay. Below that, we've got the properties editor. This contains a whole slew of tools that we can use, and also information about what's happening with the mesh object that you're working with. And underneath here we have a timeline. Actually, if I just hold my mouse on the junction of these two windows till it turns to double arrow, I can click and drag and expand this window up. Okay, the timeline we're not going to worry about for a few weeks. It's mostly used for animations. We will be using it to make cloth things with the cloth modifier, but for now I'm just going to leave it back down here. Okay, at the top of the screen we have a series of tabs and some menu commands. Okay, these tabs, we'll worry about the menu commands later. These tabs will change the look of your user interface, and these have been set up to suit particular types of tasks. For example, UV editing will show us a mesh model with a UV unwrap. Shading can show us our model in different views for setting up materials. For example, if I was to change the color of this cube to a blue or a green, and we can see how things are looking. Most of the time early on, we'll be working in either the layout or the modeling. Okay, we can customize these and add our own, but we'll come to that later on. Let's set up a couple of the user preferences that will help us along with Blender. These are the ones I use. These are the ones I will be using in my tutorials. And these are the ones that I think work best. So we'll come across to edit and we'll edit preferences. Okay, and we've got a list of things here. A list of tabs that cover all kinds of things. First thing we're going to go to is the input tab. Okay, now we have a couple of things here. First is emulate numpad. If your computer does not have a separate part of the keyboard with just numbers, usually off to the right, you might want to check this. Okay, because Blender has some dual function keys where they work differently on the two types of keyboard. So a full-size keyboard, you don't need it. If you've got a shortened keyboard, you might want to check this. Emulate 3-button mouse. This has been in Blender for a long time. I will say this from the start. Blender is very restricted if you're not using a mouse. If you're using a trackpad or a laptop without a mouse, something like that, I strongly advise going out and buying a mouse, a USB mouse. Just plug it in, it works straight away. It opens up so much more in Blender. And I personally cannot give you support without a mouse. I do understand that some people have disabilities or restraints where they can't use a mouse, they prefer to use a trackball, something like that. That's fine, we can work around that, but you do need the 3-button mouse. Now, 3-button mouse is one that has the 2 buttons, one left, one right, and the scroll wheel in the middle. When you press on the scroll wheel, it acts as a 3rd button. Okay. Next up is navigation. Okay. The one I suggest checking here is zoom to mouse position. If I close this for a minute, and you see my mouse is in the middle, I can use my scroll wheel to zoom in and out, okay? But let me just go into object mode. If I was to select this, duplicate this, move it up here, over here somewhere, okay. If I want to kind of focus on that, I can't, because my zoom is locked to the center of the screen. Okay, so if we go back to preferences and we check zoom to mouse position, okay, now the screen will zoom in to wherever I set my mouse, so I can easily navigate around the scene to where I need to be. Okay, when we've done that, if it's not already, you can check autosave preferences. Let's wait for that tooltip to go. Okay, if you don't want to autosave the preferences you make, you can just click the save preferences. Okay, now the other thing we're going to look at is add-ons. Now Blender comes with a mountain of add-ons, and there are more available to download. Add-ons are things that kind of make some functions easier in Blender or add some functionality. We will be using a few add-ons as the course progresses, but we'll come to them as we need them. The one I suggest right now is pie menus. So to demonstrate, for example, if I was to press the tab key will bring it into edit mode, tab key will bring it back out. Okay, but there's more modes than just object and edit mode, as we can see here. Okay, so if I come back to my preferences and I just type in pie into the search, we'll see we've got viewport pie menus and UI pie menu official. I would enable both of those just by clicking there and then saving the preferences. And I just turned off my autosave, so I will save. Go there. So now if I press my tab menu, you see I'm presented with a load more options. I don't have to come back up here and click and select which one I want, and I can just do it simply with the tab key and select what I want. Okay, so those for the minute are the main preferences that I would recommend.